Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have an amazing guest with us today. We are so excited to welcome Marti onto the show. She has a wonderful podcast called Where Will You Go? And in addition to that, Landon, why don't you tell us some more about Marti?
Well, Marty's was a member of the book club that we started. We met her at a John DeLynn event one night. They came over. Tom was out looking for people and brought them over, and we just became friends ever since. But Marti has been doing this podcast, and she is a kind of a coach for how to do relationships and how to talk to people who have a different belief than you. And so, Marti, let you kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah. So I guess Landon was referencing that I'm a ref for 3 practices, and that's an organization, and they have Zoom circles where you can call in and have discussions around different framing questions, and I just ref, so I make sure people follow the rules. That's really cool. We can talk more about that later. And I have an interest in trying to have relationships across different divides, whether it be political or religious. And I've been, trying to answer different questions around that for myself and then sharing what I've learned. So that my podcast is a lot about relationships across different divides, and then just talking to people that don't think the same as me and trying to be curious and understand where they're coming from. So
yeah, and that's super important this time of year. Absolutely. We've touched on that in another podcast, our episode last week, that, you're coming up against family this time of year, and you're talking to people who definitely, I like how you say it, a difference divide. That's exactly it. You may be on different pages now. So yeah, we're definitely going to dive into that for sure. So before we start that, Marti, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us kind of who you are and just any little thing you'd like to let us know.
Yeah. So I grew up in the church, so that's all I knew for a long time. Met my husband. We got married young, graduated college, moved out to Colorado for like 7 years, moved back to Utah, and then shortly after, it's hard to describe a faith crisis in like a sentence, but ultimately,
hey, we have like an hour. Go ahead.
I know, right?
This is Mormonish. Go ahead.
So I guess I kind of followed James Randi and kind of lost my belief in the supernatural a little bit, but I was still making church work in like a Jordan Peterson kind of way, which is like this pragmatically true, or it's still good, the fruits are good. And so I was kind of living like that for a while, and it was really hard for me to be on board with some of the claims that we make about, for example, really basic ones like Joseph Smith finding physical gold plates. Like I didn't feel like I could believe that, but a lot of church isn't necessarily about that. It's about becoming a better person, and I could still participate in church in that way. But I also was finding myself stuck in a rut. I kind of was starting to develop a belief that I couldn't change or become better because like I couldn't read my scriptures every day. Like whatever I tried to do, it would last for like a week, and I just couldn't do it. Right. And I also lost my belief that spiritual witness was a good way to know things. So that was making it hard for me to feel like I could get a testimony.
What was the time frame for that? Was it kind of slow progression, or was it something that happened relatively quickly once you deconstructed one thing? Or
I feel like what kind of happened is I had a moment that I still remember. I was out on a run, and I was listening to Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris discuss truth. I don't know if anybody's followed their progression of conversations, but it was a very long podcast, and they talked about nothing really except for the definition of truth. And so for some people probably have been pulling their hair out, like, why won't they get to the good stuff, right? But they didn't feel like they could move on past that topic unless they could understand each other, what truth was. And it was interesting because both of them agreed that honesty was like, we had to be honest with what we were thinking. And then for some reason, they were talking nothing about Mormons. Maybe they did, and it sparked my interest. I don't think they were talking about Mormons or Joseph Smith, but while I was running, I was like, do I actually believe Joseph Smith had gold plates? And I realized that the answer was no. And so I was trying to figure out what that meant for me. And I was like, maybe it's not a big deal. I don't know. So that's where things happened for me, where I started to realize, like, the more I was understanding about what other people think and just learning, I was like, I'm losing my confidence level that this is absolutely true. And I kept on getting the feeling from talks from church that that was the goal in life, was to gain certainty, right? Like to gain a testimony and a sure witness and be positive that this is the right thing so that you can share it with the whole world, right? And I was just finding that as I was learning more, I was losing confidence. So
That's such an interesting way to say it, but that describes it absolutely perfectly. I'm just trying to picture you coming home from the run, saying to your husband, guess what? I all of a sudden realized that I
didn't tell anyone.
Pretty private.
In fact,
yeah.
It was all on my thoughts. And so like, here I am trying to say what I was thinking. And I don't think your thoughts are as articulated as how I have to say, give you an idea. And so really the idea was really jumbled, I guess is a good way to put it.
Right.
But I do remember having the thought, like, do I believe Joseph Smith really had physical gold plates? And I remember thinking, no, I don't. So I don't know. So I was still practicing, like, everything. My husband wouldn't have even known, right? And I didn't even know. Like, wasn't even sure that this was a problem. Like, yep. So yeah, it's really hard to describe. But eventually, I would say this was kind of an off and on. I'd have a desire to talk to my husband, or a desire to talk to a brother that I have that I already knew was agnostic. That's a whole other story, but he's fairly friendly toward the church. And so I'd want to talk to him, but I was like, I don't feel like I can talk to him until I talk to my husband. Like, I felt like I was cheating on him by not letting him know. And in the end, I really think it was probably a good move for me, because I think it slowed down the process and we were able to go through things together, versus me going on my own and then being in basically a mixed faith marriage. Like, I don't feel like we ever were in a mixed faith marriage. And I don't know, that would have been really hard. So I think I knew that would have been hard for me. And I think I was protecting myself from that. I don't know, maybe not. I don't, it's hard to say. I didn't even know I didn't even realize that was a thing. Like, I didn't know about John Dehlin. I didn't know about I didn't know about this world that we're in right now. I had no idea it existed.
Well, and that's so funny, because you arrive at those thoughts on your own. A lot of people have that misunderstanding. Oh, someone was influenced, or they knew about all this like you said, the world. No, you just arrive at it. It's just a very organic process, different for each person, but you just arrive at it.
Right. I kind of gave myself like a bit of an outsider test of faith, I guess. And I was realizing that I don't know. I had that before too. Like, I remember in high school thinking things like, it's a good thing I was born in the church, because I never would have believed this. Like, so I kind of felt like I was born into this family for that reason, like I still believe, I don't know. Anyways, yeah, I did talk to my husband. I think I went through that it's hard to pinpoint when that happened. I know when that podcast happened, but it was roughly like 3 years before I ever said anything to my husband. And it just kind of came up organically in a conversation. We were talking about how we we're going to improve our family home evening and our come follow me lessons for our family and stuff. And I don't even know how it came up, but I basically was like, I doubt that I'll actually be able to do that, because I was in this rut of actually feeling like I couldn't improve anything, let alone spiritual stuff. I just didn't feel like I could change myself. I kind of was like in the deterministic mindset that, like, I am my genes and my history up to this point, and there was really nothing I could do about it. Like, I am what I am, and I can't get better. Like, it was really a pretty bad rut to be in. I think a lot of times spirituality, like the church, can get people out of that rut, but it was causing me to be in that rut. So it was, it was kind of depressing. So I told him about how I didn't know the church was true anymore. I think I might have worded it something like that. And he was freaking out for like 24 hours. I didn't find out until much later. But he said that he was like, what does our eternal marriage mean nothing to you? Like, so he was having his own on his side, like, what's going on? And then he came and talked to me like 24 hours later, and he's like, what does this mean? I'm like, nothing. I want to try still. I'll still try it. I just don't think it's going to work. That's basically how I put it. And he was bothered that I wouldn't just pray about it, because I kept on telling him, even if I got a spiritual witness, I would doubt it, because I'd be afraid it was me wanting to believe it. Like it was me creating it so that I could believe it. He couldn't understand that. He couldn't understand why I didn't think that was a good way to know things. So, but anyway, yeah, so we decided to go ahead and try to do better with things. It was like 2 months after that, we got asked to like speak in church. And my husband's topic was, how do we know, by reason or revelation? And I was like, wow, that's kind of on topic topic. And then my topic was why we should listen to General Conference. So it was the Sunday before October of 2019. And go. Sorry. So then, yeah, I gave a talk. It must have been decent, because then after that, they called me to be in the Young Women, and which is kind of crazy that was going on, and they had no idea. Discernment, I guess, huh? Anyways, when I got called, I was pretty upfront with the bishop about it, and I told him where I was at spiritually and that I didn't feel like I could know. And he was really compassionate. He was really awesome about it. And he said, I really feel like this is where you should be. So accepted the calling, and I served there for a few weeks. Meanwhile, I have a spiritual high because I was honest with the bishop. He didn't take away my temple recommend. He didn't, yeah, he let me serve in a calling in the fullest way that you possibly can, being a presidency, right? And so that was huge for me. And I take off the back burner to read Saints, because we had a stake president in Colorado that said everyone needs to read Saints. And so I took that off the back burner, thinking it was going to be like 13 miracles or 17 miracles, or it was going to be like the Legacy movie. Like in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, I could use some pioneer. I could use some pioneer testimonies, right? Anyways, that's not what Saints is. For those that are listening that have not read it, it's probably the most transparent history that I had ever read up to that point, because basically all the rumors that I thought might be false, I found out generally historians believe are true, right? And they were spinning in a faithful light, and it wasn't good enough for me. Like the way they spun it, it was clear to me for the first time, like in my adult history, like the first time in my history, I looked at this and I went, wow, the church is biased. And it never occurred to me that church was biased before then. Even with all my doubts and stuff, I still felt like maybe, hopefully, the church was the closest to God's church, right? Like it was still what it claimed to be, even in an imperfect way. And then about halfway through Saints, maybe, I had a conversation with my husband and basically let him know I kind of want to see what the critics have to say about the church for the first time. And then got on Reddit, and within like 5 minutes, someone referenced the CES letter. And then I was reading the CES letter, read it in like a day or two. Yeah, and then wanted to resign right then. And my husband was like, whoa, calm down. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's probably it's a little preemptive, being that I just like, this has been such a short amount of time, right? We ended up baptizing our daughter still in December or January, actually. And then right after she was baptized, we kept going to church. The week before COVID shut everything down was the first week we tried another church. We went to a Presbyterian church, and then COVID shut everything down. We didn't go to any church. And then I felt like having that, like, things turn off during COVID. I hated it because I didn't get to know or connect with other ex-Mormons, but I think it was good. There were some good aspects. Like we were able to disappear quietly too. So there were some benefits there, but anyway, and now we're kind of here.
Uh,
Definitely went through an angry phase, and I feel like I've kind of came out of that and just, I don't know, I'm just interested in maintaining relationships at this point.
At what point did you tell your parents or other close family members, and how did that go?
We told them pretty early on. We told them before the baptism because we were afraid there wasn't going to be a baptism, and we wanted them give them a heads up of why. But we kind of we were in this place where we didn't know where we were going to go, right? We didn't know a year from then if we were still going to be practicing or if we were going to not be practicing. It was hard to imagine not practicing, and it was also hard to imagine practicing. Like, felt like we had to just like we had to make a decision for two bad choices in front of us, and we had to pick the least bad one, and we didn't know which one that was at that point. So the decision Kevin, or my husband, made was if he didn't do it and we kept practicing later on, he'd probably regret it, versus if we left and he did do it, probably wouldn't care. And so he talked to the bishop about it. Again, the bishop was way cool about it. And he basically said, like, yeah, I have like a drop of faith that I could say that, yeah, I hope it's true, but I don't really think so. But anyways, and the bishop was really cool about it. And he's like, yeah, well, he just kind of said, you're being honest about it. There's probably a lot of people that feel the same way as you, and they're not being honest about it. So I'm not going to punish you for being honest. So
wow. Bishop
anyway.
Roulette, you won that one. That sounds like a very
we're still friends with him. He's really awesome.
Wow,
so.
That's really lucky.
Yeah. So we did tell our family really early, though, right at the beginning. We had one brother come to us. I was like, how's this happening? What? You guys were like what I was trying to be like. How can this be happening to you? Like, anyways.
So how'd it go with the parents? Were they receptive? Was there friction?
It was hard on them. Yeah. I had a lot of confrontations with my dad for probably a couple months straight. I was going over there quite a bit. I was helping them on their farm. And so I was there a lot, and it seems like he wanted to bring it up almost as much as I did, because I did too, right? And there's just a lot of negative interactions. I talk about this on when we did the Good Book Club for Dummies, and then also I published that as a podcast episode. But I was reading a book, and I just realized that I need to start focusing more on what we have in common than what we don't agree on anymore. And that really helped our relationship a lot. So
is that what led you to the three practices? Were you concerned because of the relationship with your father, or was it neighbors, or what led you to
I would
explore that and say, I need to find a way to talk to people that's not confrontational?
Right.
I think my drive for that was just that my biggest fear in leaving was losing friendships. And so I think in my mind, if I could maintain those friendships, then I could do what I needed to do as far as life decisions of not practicing in that faith, right? Like, I can be a not practicing LDS person. I mean, I know it's possible to have friends with people that are not LDS, right? Like, why can't I be that person? So I knew it's possible. And so, yeah, I was trying to do everything in my power to maintain those friendships, because that's what was important to me. So, yeah, as far as the relationship with my dad, I think sometimes when you have a closer relationship, you kind of take that for granted. And so you're willing to talk about some hard stuff. And I realized while I was listening to an audiobook that, like, we haven't been, like, there's like a 5-to-1 ratio that David Osler brings up in his Bridges book. So do you guys know? Have you heard of that book? Yeah. So Bridges, ministering to those who, how did it say?
Doubt, or
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's that. So
question, I think. Ministering to those who question, or right. Anyways, but he brings up that ratio, and I definitely was not having that ratio with my dad. If anything, it was backwards. Like, I was having 5 heavy conversations for every positive interaction with him, and that definitely was straining.
What that is a little bit, just so people who are listening, if they aren't familiar with that.
Right. So like you have a conversation you can have an uncomfortable conversation with someone. Maybe you're having a disagreement or you just feel when it's a heavy conversation, you can feel it, right? There's tension and it doesn't feel good. And I do think those conversations need to be had if you want a deep relationship with someone. But the idea is that you need to have 5 positive ones. So ones where they're light and they're positive and you enjoy being there. Obviously, your psychology is like, I don't like that having that feeling. So you're not going to want to be around that person anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of found with my mother, we just avoided conversation pretty much because it would come to that. So she'd like call up the institute teacher from the class she was taking, and say, "Will you talk to him?" Instead of us talking, because she didn't want to do that. And we really haven't recovered from that. We don't talk much, and it seems like anytime we go to a family event, the church always comes up. You can't even. I'm the oldest boy. My dad has passed on. So whenever it's time to choose someone for the prayer at a family gathering, typically that would fall on me. But since I'm not worthy, I guess, to be doing that, I'd say I'm not worthy, but because I'm not a believer, I'm obviously not worthy to do that, they think. So
in their eyes, yeah, for sure.
in their minds. And then you have to, it goes to a brother or something, why don't you pick someone or whatever, so that's been a challenge for me. Is I've never had the 1 in 5, because we've never, it seems like we can't have a conversation that doesn't eventually come back to the church at some point and turn negative. So I've just I love my mother. I know she loves me, but we just kind of avoid talking because we know it'll go somewhere. Have you experienced that? Or I think I think some people may have the connection like you have, where they can have those deep conversations, and other people are more, surface and just avoid them.
I would say that I can't remember the last time my dad and I had a conversation like that. So I think when you're going through that phase, I think is when it's almost like I definitely feel like I did this. As I was leaving, I wanted everybody to know I did everything right. I followed all the rules. I am not leaving because I'm lazy. I'm not leaving, like all the reasons that we're taught, the reasons people leave. I was like, it shocked me that I was leaving because my intuition was telling me like there's a problem here, right? So it was shocking to me that that wasn't ever a reason I thought of that people left, right? And so it was so important for me it's almost like there's like this social currency you have, and you don't want to lose that, like within the Mormon framework.
Yep.
And you've worked so hard. I don't know that. I mean, I'm not saying that people that are checking all the boxes are doing it just for the social currency, but there is a social currency, and there is on this side of it too. That's just life, I think. And you don't want to lose that. You want to like maintain that and still leave. And I think at some point you just have to accept that that's not a social currency, that you're going to have to go build up your social currency with other things, like, does that even make sense what I'm trying to, I don't know. I'm thinking off the top of my head here. I've never had this.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And I think you protect the currency. Like, I mean, I admire you so much for letting everyone know in your family where you are. I admire Landon for doing the same. My situation, no one knows. Mm-hmm. So I have imposter syndrome, but it's just impossible. My parents are elderly. There's no way they would even understand. So in my mind, I'm maintaining my currency. I'm doing it to be kind, because they just honestly would not understand. I have one sister, she knows a little bit more about where I am, but I've never done what the two of you have done, with different results, it seems like. In Landon's, case, he's just avoiding those conversations. You are in a place where you can have those conversations. So I don't know.
Or just okay, or just be okay with not having them too.
Or just be okay with not having it. Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And that's how I'd say it's been lately. However, if I really wanted to ask one of my brothers or even my parents something, like a burning question that I really wanted to ask them, I feel like I could. Like, It's just that, and I don't even feel like it would hurt the relationship. It's just I've gotten to a place where I'm not curious about where they're at, because I already knew where they were at, like I'm not interested in giving them new information that might set them that I really do think that confronting information that like from saints, is better when you are the one willingly going out and getting it, I guess. I don't want to throw that at anybody.
Right.
Because I
You're
think
not going to give that as a Christmas present to people that you
no.
want.
Well, it's funny though. I'm pretty sure my mom read it. So
Oh, really?
mhm.
Different perspectives. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
For some people, saints like you is the nail in the coffin. Other people find it incredibly inspiring. So you
Yep.
never know how someone's. So,
Well-
and your children were younger,
Yeah.
which I'm always very jealous of. I raised my children entirely in the church, and that's its own set of circumstances. But so, how did you discuss it with them? How is that going with the children?
COVID helped. See, like nobody was going to church,
Yeah.
right? So friends weren't going to church. We weren't going to church. We've kind of, as church started back up, we kind of left it up to them whether they want to participate in the activities, and they actually do participate still. Our records aren't with the church anymore, so we're just, that neighborhood kid that shows up at the activities. I mean, I know when I was doing the activities, I was always one of those kids, right? And now I understand why.
Right.
but yeah. Yeah. So early on, I remember my kids being scared that we were going to leave the church. But through COVID and stuff like that, like we have one daughter that is, I don't know how to describe it. She's more open, I would say, to like going back to church, if that's what it is. But we ask her specifically about going to church. She's like, no, it's boring. So it's not like,
You can
I think
always
she
count
just,
on that. Yeah.
yeah.
I found that the kids were a lot easier to talk to than the parents. My kids were older. I had one who was already out of the church. She left for a boy, but then she found other things out. So she kind of knew things before I knew them. She never really discussed them with us. But I had a boy on a mission. I had another boy who was going to go on a mission. And when we gathered them together to say, hey, I don't believe anymore. That I said, but I'm not going to tell you why. If you want to ask me, you can tell me, or I'll tell you if you ask, if you want to know. And none of them ever asked. They didn't really. It didn't seem to bother them. I mean, obviously they were a little upset at first, but once they started seeing, okay, I don't need to ask dad why, I'm fine. And eventually almost all my kids are out now. And they've never asked me anything. They found it out on their own. So I found with the younger ones, it was much easier, but with a parent, they almost, it's kind of, oh, I raised you better. I need it. Why would you do this to our family? You're separating our family. And in my case, my father's passed away and my mom's just waiting for him. She's waiting to die and go be with him. And I don't want to have a conversation with her saying, oh, this isn't true, and here's all the things I found. I'm like, I just want her to be able to go, but we can't get together and not church comes up and we not start knocking heads together. So I think it's a little different for everybody, but I definitely think telling the kids was, for me, easier than telling the parents.
Yeah. We were pretty honest with them with what we were thinking, though. We just kind of were straight up with them with where we were at. Like when we were uncertain, that's what we told them. And we asked them how they were feeling. And I remember that's what when my one daughter said, I'm just afraid that we're going to leave. I'm like, you don't have to worry about that. Like, if you want to go to church, I'll support you. We'll go to church together. Like, not a big deal. But yeah, after COVID, they didn't want to go to church. So it wasn't a thing. In fact, I've been to church, and that week that I did go, I asked them if they wanted to come with me. They're like, no. So anyways, no, it's interesting. I think it is hard for a parent probably, and not in just like some, I think as a parent, you teach your kids stuff, and when something's important to you, you'd hope it'd be important to your kids, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure it is hard. And then also I think there's a lot of promises that if you're faithful, that your kids will be faithful. And ultimately, I wish the church would teach that agency is a bigger thing than that, than faithfulness, and your kids will be faithful. Because I think that was hard for, I think it's been hard for my husband's parents more than mine. Because like I had a brother that kind of went through this in his own way right after he came back from his mission. And so my parents had kind of, I think, already gone through that before. And so they were more ready for me to tell them that, I guess, if that makes sense.
I
But
think that's kind of the key, what you just said, because for a parent, it's kind of a reflection on them and their
Totally.
how they raised you. You know, it's kind of a
Yep.
reflection on them. Whereas when you're a parent going to the child, you don't really see it as a reflection of the child. You know, you're telling them, hey, I learned something. So it's kind of a little bit different, I think. I think that's kind of maybe the key there.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
But then you wish you'd learned it sooner,
Yes.
because like me, I have 3 sons. 2 are fully in, 1 on a mission, and so I raised them. I did this. I always say,
Yeah,
so
that's the hard part.
those
I
are
did this.
feelings too. I did this, somehow I did it. So tell us how you got involved with the 3 practices, or we're just, part of our program for this month is trying to answer questions about how we do have these conversations, and maybe techniques or strategies to be able to, have conversations and interactions so that everything remains positive, which is, I think, what we all want.
Yeah. Okay, so 3 practices. David Osler was in the Restoration Table Facebook group. And when the musket fire talk was given, that was really big in that Facebook group. And there were a lot of, there was a lot of contention there around that. And there was a lot of disagreement, because in that Facebook group, there are members and people that have left. And so David Osler, I'm not really sure how he found 3 practices, but he created a 3 practice circle around that. And I can't even remember what the framing question was, but there were a lot of participants, and I experienced what a 3 practice circle was. And I was like, wow, this is a really cool tool. And so we kept on trying to do some 3 practice circles. They weren't quite as attended as that one. But David tried to start a LDS Bridges group where he would host these circles, and not enough people came for it to be worth the time. So there were like 5 of us refs that he helped fund our training, because when you do the training, it costs a bunch of, like, I can't remember. I think I put $100 toward it, but I think David Osler did way more than that. I want to say it was like 500 or something like that to do the training. And so he kind of gave me a scholarship, if you will, to go through the training. And after I did that, we tried to do those circles, and they just weren't well attended. I think if people knew what they were, I think they would have been. But
Can you kind of describe what they are?
Yeah.
I know
So
I attended too, I think. It was absolutely fascinating. So describe.
So there's a framing question. I think I did one where it was something like, I don't know. So if you go to 3practices.com, they have ones that are upcoming. And you can also look at a list of previous ones that they have done. Sometimes they're politically driven. I wish I had one off the top of my head. My mind is drawing a blank.
Definitely questions where people are going to be fairly passionate on either side of it, or have some definite points of view, even completely at odds, these types of questions that you address.
Yeah. Something like, how do you feel about your family member that has left or stays in the church, or something like that? I can't remember. I did. So anyway, you have a framing question, and there's like a little intro video to like help you understand what it is too, that we always play. And then you go at the very beginning, the rules, they're really not that complicated. Honestly, you could sit in a room for like 5 seconds and then figure out what the rules are yourself. You don't have to have them read to you. But they do go through the rules so that you can feel comfortable participating if you want. You can just watch. And so you get a volunteer to respond to the framing question. You have 2 minutes. So the ref will hold up a timer and say, you have 2 minutes to respond. And as soon as you're 2 minutes up, you're done talking. And then people can ask you clarifying questions, beginning with, I'd be curious to know. And then those questions aren't really supposed to be that leading. They're supposed to be genuinely curious. So you get to practice being curious, and then the person has a minute to respond. And so you might get like maybe 4 different people asking them clarifying questions. And then you go to the next volunteer that will talk for 2 minutes on the framing question. And what I've found when I first went to them, it was interesting because I would go to a circle and then be up all night thinking about it, going, oh, I should have said this, I should have said this, and just so concerned about how I wasn't able to get my idea across. And the more that I've gone to those, the more I've realized that's not about them understanding me or me convincing them. It's about me practicing listening. And so I wouldn't say you should use this as a tool to convince anyone, because that's not what it's good for. It's good for you to practice listening. So, and I think that that tool is probably the number one thing that when you talk about relationships, what do they say? Be a good listener, be a good listener. But how do you even practice that, right? Like when you're in the heat of the moment, you can't help it. Like you're emotional and you are like mad, you're angry, you're like physically mad. You know what I mean? You can feel the heat in your chest and you're just pissed. So, and that's how it was for 3 practices when I first started going to them. And I can't say that I have really learned to, let me tell you what the 3 practices are. So the first one is I'll be unusually interested in others. The second one is I'll stay in the room with difference. And the third one is I'll stop comparing my best with your worst. So I don't think you'd get that from just going to one circle. But as I've gone to a bunch of them and I've refed and stuff, especially, I don't know if this would happen in all cases, but I've got to know some of the other refs that definitely think differently than me. And I've just really been like, I admire them, some of the qualities they have, how curious their questions are, or how well they are able to sit in the room with difference when I know someone's saying something that they probably disagree with. And so then you start to really be able to not compare your best with someone else's worst because they may disagree with you on something. So
that's a big
anyway.
one. No, the one thing I learned that I still use all the time is I'm curious to know.
Yep.
That is just such a great way to ask something, because you're just saying you're curious. Please tell me your point of view. It's non-threatening and you can kind of go back and forth. So I know that's the very simplest level of that, but I really definitely, having attended a couple, took that away, that if there's ever a situation where I feel like it might get a little dicey, I would just say, I'm curious to know. And who can disagree with that?
An example of that, just recently, I don't know if Marty, I don't know if you've seen in the news this gold statue of Joseph Smith that they put in India, and I can just see you're going to a family gathering with your relatives who are believing, and one of them might say, "Oh, wasn't that incredible, that golden statue of Joseph Smith?" And a way to answer that, Rebecca, you would say, I'd be curious to know why you think that is neat.
Right. What resonates with the statue?
What resonates with you? Yeah. Why is that? Why do you think that is cool? And you may have a completely different opinion, be going, I'm thinking that's idolatry or something. But you listen to why they think it's cool, because they may have a legitimate reason for why they think it's cool.
Right.
But you haven't thought of it yet. So that was what I thought was cool about the thing, is it made you sit back and listen and say, okay, he's got a different point of view. Let me at least listen to it and see if I can understand it, even if I don't agree with it.
Right.
Very true. Yeah. And I forgot about the restoration table that you're involved in. That's another amazing place where you're trying to build the bridges. So yeah, talk about that. I that slipped my mind to ask you, but that's another amazing thing you're involved in.
Yeah. So Stephen Pennicker, that's how I found him. When he was first starting up his YouTube channel, he put links to his videos in there, and I, out of curiosity, went over and looked at him like, wow, this is so cool. So I haven't been as active on Facebook, period. I don't love Facebook. I don't like social media. It gives me anxiety. So I just don't, I'm not on there. So I didn't even have a Facebook account, but when we went through everything, I had a strong desire to connect with people. And so I created a Facebook account because I ran across Tony Fieldson's YouTube channel, which is also called the Restoration Table. He put out a video right after conference of 2020, I think. And I never listened to conference better than the one right after my faith crisis. I don't know if you guys are the same, but I was listening
every word, right?
Oh,
and saying,
yes.
I'm curious to know why you would say that.
Oh man, it was actually a huge disappointment because it's so interesting. The world revolves around me, right? So all this my collapse of belief happens. And then I'm like, oh, now the church is going to change and be like, and just come clean with everything because I found this out and it's been happening for the last 10 years. So of course that's not what it was, but they doubled down on the restoration, the First Vision story. And I was like, what? I thought they were going to come out with this new First Vision story that incorporated all the versions. And they didn't. And it felt like doubling down. They were just going to totally ignore all of the, I don't know. So anyways, I was disappointed to say the least, but I found Tony's YouTube channel and he's like, yeah, we have the restoration table where all can come sit at the table. There's room for everyone. And so I created a Facebook account just to get into that group. So anyway, it was good for me. I think I met a lot of members that admit, like, they don't try to, I don't know how to explain it. While keeping their faith, they're able to say, yeah, I can understand your point of view. Basically, there were a few people in there that they acted in a way that I wanted to stand up for them too. Like I wanted to stand up for their belief and be like, it's sometimes ex-Mormons are unfair too,
And so it's a place where practicing Mormons, nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons can all interact and all are appreciated and discussed and in a civil way. So
there were definitely some fires, and I was on the
really tell us.
Well, like Tony invited me to be one of the admins, and there was like a group of us, 12 of us admins. I can't remember. Anyway, and we would have meetings to discuss stuff, and we were all pretty active on there for a while, and then it kind of died off. I don't know if it was really active because of COVID. Like this was all happening right during COVID, right? So maybe that's why people had more time. I haven't figured it out, but it has kind of died off. Or if there was just a new swath of people that were coming through, and I've noticed that as you leave the church, you kind of go through these stages, and maybe there were a group of us that were going through these stages together, but then it became uninteresting for people just entering. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know.
No, there's a progression. We see that in the book club, don't we?
Yeah.
People want to read, I got to read Blood of the Prophets, Rust Unrolling. The rest of us are like, give me a good astronomy book. Let's read some philosophy. You definitely are on a journey, and that's okay.
Yeah. So I don't know so it's not, if someone went to go visit it now, they'd probably be like, what is she talking about? But it was in its day quite active, and it helped me a lot. I met some people that I think are fair thinkers, and it was interesting to find those people. So
I've got a question. In my family, we've got a lot of boys, four boys and 2 girls, and we're very passionate when we get together with our arguments. We have very lively discussions, and I'm the only one who's out, and sometimes you feel completely, outnumbered, and you get frustrated. What's your recommendation for when that happens? Is it just walk away? Is it what's the strategy there to calm yourself down and get back into focus?
That's a good question. When I have get-togethers, it's interesting. So I've got a brother that's kind of on the same page as me, so I'm never alone. If we're gonna have one of those, and he will always get the questions going. Like he will ask the questions everybody's thinking about, but maybe want to keep the peace so you don't bring it up, he'll ask him. Yeah, I don't know what my best advice. I'd say ask questions, right? So you can ask them questions and just yeah, because you don't have to convince them of anything, right? But
Right.
I think it's a good opportunity to do some street epistemology, right? Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's great that you brought that up. That is extremely helpful if you can master those techniques
Yeah.
and walk that tightrope, right? So no, I think
Yeah.
that's good. I mean, I'm more of a it's all understood, don't ask, don't tell kind of when I'm with extended family. The ones that do know where I'm at, like I went to a homecoming this morning for a niece, in this family, and they know where I'm at. They're not going to bring it up. I'm not going to bring it up. There's tons of common ground that we can focus on. Obviously, there are some places where it does come to a head, and we just try to on both sides really remove ourselves from those points where that might happen, and we try to absolutely focus on the common ground, because I think we both realize what we could lose if we do let it come to a head like that. So we just and I don't know, some people might say that's not healthy, but that has worked for years. And so my husband Tom and I can still be really good friends with these cousins that we go out with all the time to movies and events and things, and we just do not go there. We
That's
just
not the
don't.
thing you have in common, so there's really
Yeah,
no need to bring it
luckily
up.
it's not the thing we have in common. Yeah, absolutely. There's more to it than that. Whereas with my family, I think maybe the one thing we do have in common is church. And so that's why I really don't go there at all and don't even reveal who I am or what I really think. So it may land and depend just on the relationship and what you're trying to gain from the interaction, what you're willing to lose to gain what you want to gain. There's all those dynamics that are in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I've also found that when, especially when, I think one-on-one is a lot better way to have the conversation, because, you can, sometimes you can have that breakthrough where you're openly talking. I know when I've been in groups talking about it, there always seems to be that one person who absolutely has to defend the church no matter what you're bringing up. And you just can't get around that, and then it just stops all conversation. So, it seems to me like smaller groups rather than engaging in a large group discussion like that. Some of those conversations might be better one-on-one or very small group.
Well, I know that a lot of families, like, they enjoy the conversation, right? And that sounds like kind of what you're describing. Maybe I was thinking of that wrong, where they're maybe not that they're willing to get into it, right?
Oh yeah, we'll do a lot of political talk or whatever, and then someone's on one side, someone's on the other, and you're just going at it, and it's fun. But when it turns to religion,
You're
it's more
outnumbered.
personal.
Yeah.
Well, and you're more defensive. I
You're
mean,
more
that's
defensive. Yep.
your post life worldview. You can't rock that. It really does come down to what you believe about the afterlife, I think. And sometimes I think, okay, there's this thing I call the Mormon lizard brain. I have experienced it in other people where you can be talking and then maybe you'll say something that you don't realize what you really said. And if you're talking to, a faithful member, this lizard brain will kick in, and to defend themselves, it'll just spit out something fairly hateful, or because you're maybe rocking their worldview in what you're saying. I think of an example where Tom, and I think I've told this before, my husband Tom went to a geological site. It was like a waterfall and whatever. And the marquee clearly said, this is, several million years old, right? And so he's reading it with his faithful Latter-day Saint sister, and he's like, look at this is amazing, and look at that. And she goes, that's not real. That's not true. It's not that old. Nope, not, and he was like, what are you talking about? Lizard brain, that had attacked her view. She can't even entertain it. It just, so to me, if you kind of understand that these things that may seem hateful or hurtful or just completely like, why are you closing your brain off? It's just kind of this innate reaction that protects you. And I think we all have that. Maybe not church, in different things where you just have to say, I can't hear that. I believe, in order for me to maintain my equilibrium, I have to keep thinking this, so maybe be aware of those in yourself and respect in others that they have that. So, and at that point, I think you go, I will not engage you anymore because that is kicked in, and that's it's a drop the mic moment, right? It kind of is. And that happens. It sounds like maybe that's in your family land and what you're talking about. They drop the mic and that's it.
Yep.
Discussion's
Yep.
over. So I don't know.
And sometimes we just turn to the old stop by, drop the presents and say, we got to go. Just avoid the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking of something that it's interesting. I don't know, like I think about family conversations and stuff. And I don't know, I think everyone is pretty good at having those discussions for the most part. Um, yeah, I think it just kind of depends on, I think you can probably get better at it, right? So that if they're saying something, it's not a reflection on you anymore, right? Because
Right.
one thing that I've kind of learned with I'm not going to take their baggage, right? If someone thinks poorly of me for a bad reason, that's not my problem, right? Like I think that happens in politics too, even like people make some assumption about you and they're wrong. That's their problem. It's not my problem to like defend myself all the time. Like I know I'm doing my best and that's the best I can do, right? Like I don't know.
No,
But
and I
yeah,
think that's something you have to learn to do because your
yeah,
first reaction is to, oh, I didn't do that. I'm not, what are you saying? You want to defend, but then you have to realize, that's what they're thinking. That's not me. It isn't me.
yeah.
So just to keep the peace, I guess. So, wow, it's very interesting. So, if you had to sort of, I don't know, give your hope for post-Mormons as they're navigating the Christmas and holiday season, what would you hope in these situations that they're facing? We talked to Steve Pinecker earlier today, and he said something interesting. He said, when you feel alone, you're very much more likely not to be able to have these conversations in a positive way because you feel attacked. When you feel you have community in some way, just people on your side, even if it's online, even if it's a book club, if you just feel heard in other areas, you're maybe able to say, okay, this is the conversation I'm having now. It's not necessarily my people. I'll try, but I do have, a community. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what you think of that idea. I thought it was really good. And maybe just what would your hope be for some of these, as we're trying to navigate this going into the next month, what would you hope to see for people on both sides?
Right. Well, I guess my biggest hope is that it would be that everyone could have a good time, right? Like everyone can gather together, enjoy each other's company, enjoy like enjoy their family traditions, their meals and stuff like that. And yeah, so that you can leave uplifted and not drained, right? But I don't know. Holidays in themselves, holiday parties and stuff can be draining anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
add religious differences, a difference divide on top of that. And yeah,
yeah.
you get people storming out, I'm taking my fruitcake, I'm going. So,
Well, yeah, that's actually a good point because, we talk about the family dynamic, but also, especially in Utah area or the Mormon corridor, you may work with a lot of members and now you're going to a work party and you don't necessarily have the same standards that they have seen in the past. You may say, I'm okay drinking that drink, the company's buying a drink, I'm taking it, or,
yeah,
I want a cup of coffee or whatever.
right.
And yet you're out in front of those people and all of a sudden that can be a little bit of trigger too, as you run into those situations over the holidays, because you tend to socialize more over the holidays than you do at other times of the year. So it might be noticed more.
That's true. Yeah, to drink or not to drink.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you're mad if you're in a social setting and you're like, I can't believe I can't just because someone will see me. I'm an
Yeah.
adult. I'm going to do it. It's a big mental argument you sometimes have with yourself where you're like,
Yeah.
what can I lose? What can I get? There's that whole little tightrope that you're on. So
It's true. And
yeah,
do you know what bugs me the most about that situation is that I don't think there is one right answer. Like
No.
it depends on where you're at and it depends on it really depends on each person. Like I think that bothers me the most with relationships too is like I wish there were just some rule book that I could hand out to people or I could have that would tell me exactly all the things that I need to do to keep relationships good.
yeah,
And it's there isn't, but I do think, I definitely do think that there are things we can practice to make it so that we're the ones that are easier to get along with. Like, I do believe that that's a thing. And that's what I would give people hope that they are in control of their life more than sometimes maybe they give themselves credit for. Like, I think you do have more control than you think. So
Yeah, I think you have to weight that relationship and say that that person doesn't mean that much to me. I'll go ahead and do that. This person does
Yeah.
mean a lot to me. I need to consider, how what I do might affect them. And I want to be a little more careful about that. So I think you definitely have to weigh the relationship to determine, how you come out or how you have a discussion on that stuff.
yeah. And I think really any relationship is kind of a negotiation, right? Like, you kind
Yeah.
of have to negotiate stuff. So,
For sure.
and I think sometimes we think things matter to people more than they really do.
Mhm.
Because we're projecting onto them what we thought mattered, and then we find out they probably really don't care.
That's
That's a thing, I think.
that is the thing. What are your thoughts on setting up boundaries ahead of time? I've had some people say, oh, I make sure that my parents know that we're not going to do this, or we're not, our family won't do, kind of, I mean, I can see the pros and cons of that. Maybe in some cases, that's the only way that you're going to be able to navigate going to someone's house for the holidays, that you will set up, boundaries. Of course, I don't know.
I
I've had
think
people
it's
say they won't come over because I have a coffee maker. That's their boundary. But why can't I have my coffee maker? I mean, so it does go both ways.
it does go both ways. Yeah, I know that I've I've heard stories where it's like, can I bring my coffee? And the answer is, well, no, because
Yeah.
grandma might smell it.
Yeah. No,
So it's not
exactly
even
right.
that they care, it's that
Or
they're
can I
worried
have
that other
my
people are going to smell
partner
it.
sleep over, at your house? No, you cannot, because you're
Right.
not, there's so many different situations where I guess it's a boundary negotiation, but sometimes there's
Yeah.
no way. There's no way. And then you may lose something if you're not willing to concede something. I don't know.
I don't know. I think boundaries are probably wise. And I think another thing, if you're wondering if that was the right boundary to set, I think it's okay to revisit them too. So maybe you have a boundary where you're not ready to talk about church stuff and you need space, and you can just let people know, hey, I don't want to talk about church stuff, if that's okay. Right.
It's just
And
not
then maybe later down the road, you are willing to talk about it, and you can just, I don't know. Sometimes bluntness isn't that bad. Like, my grandma found out that I was having problems with the church. I think that's how she worded it, through the grapevine. I wasn't planning on telling my grandparents, for the same reason that you don't want to tell your parents, Rebecca. And I mean, they're older, and I just didn't feel like it mattered. What that it didn't change my interactions with them, and so I just didn't bring it up with her. But she found out about it, and it actually wasn't that bad of a conversation. She was very matter of fact about it, and I was too, and it was fine. Like, she she bore a testimony to me, and it was kind of cool to learn that story because she'd never told that to me before. And I don't know, I don't think I try not to get offended when people tell me about something that's really important to them. And I just remember this is really important to them, and that's okay. I do think the church can be very transformative for people. That is their spiritual home, and that's okay. It's not mine anymore. Or at least if it is, it's residual, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Sometimes I think you have to look back and just remember I was there too.
Yeah.
And I was that person too. So I understand it, and you try to, it's not easy by any means. Sometimes you can be hurt, but you say, I don't think they intended that, or I know where that's coming from. Sometimes I look at my mom and I say, she's coming from a place of love when she keeps trying to get me back into the church, because she sees that as, I want him to be with me. So I try to see that as she's coming at me from a place of love, even though we can't talk very much because we end up doing that. So
yeah. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. I feel like that's very, very true. And it also at the same time hurts when there seems to be this barrier that you can't get rid of too, right? Like, I had this thought about just how you acting in a way that is, you want the best for someone, I think can update their beliefs. They might believe that, for example, you can't be a good person unless you're a member, or you can't be a good person if you leave. And your continual relationship with them can update that belief of theirs. They're going to go, oh, wow, Landon really hasn't changed in the ways that it matters. He's still kind, he's still caring, like he hasn't changed in the way that matters. So it turns out that good people can leave the church. And so then they might go, oh, maybe he can do more good outside the church than the church. I don't know. Like, right.
Then I come home with a tattoo on this arm and
we have to be missionaries. That's exactly what it is, just by being ourselves. I think that's great. So no, I think this has been a really productive conversation. And, of course we have no answers, right? That's what we arrived at. But and every situation is different, but really good suggestions, I think. So Landon, do you have any last thoughts? And then Marti Lynn, last thoughts, and then we'll probably end here. I think it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I think what you said is true. There are no answers. I wish we could push the easy button and say this is what it is, but it's having a conversation, thinking through things and thinking how you're going to handle it is really all you can do. And then sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. It's going to backfire on you. But you have a plan. Sometimes you're scared, but you decide how you're going to approach it, and then you go and approach it that way, and hopefully the best comes out of it. So
yeah, I think my last thought, I guess, is don't set up the person you want a good relationship with up for failure. So the best example of this is sometimes you're like, why won't they ask? I can't believe they're not even asking why I left, right? And then on the other hand, you have this other idea of why won't they just give me space? And so you could think of a situation where they're failing no matter what. They didn't come and ask, or they're asking me too much, right? So I think just trying to frame it in a way where you're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like I think if you really want a relationship with someone, you can start with the olive branch. And most of the time, I can't think of a situation where it hasn't been given back to me. So I do have hope that people, for the most part, will reciprocate. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yep. So it's positive. We're hopeful and we're positive that things will go well. So one last time, tell us the name of your podcast, where we can find it. It is a wonderful podcast, everybody. Please take a listen. So let us know that.
So it's called Where Will You Go? And I believe you can find it in any podcast app. And then it's also on YouTube under Mormon Discussions, and it has its own playlist. So Mormon Discussions has like Marriage on a Tightrope, Mormonism Live. There's a bunch of new ones. I'm trying to think of all of them.
And that's Bill Reel's like kind of
Yep.
umbrella, isn't it? So there's like Mormonism Live and Radio Free Mormon, and all of that in there. Yeah. So a lot of good stuff. So
yep.
Excellent.
And yeah, mine's on there. And if you want to come and hear something that you disagree with, you can come to my channel and you will hear it, because I step on all the sacred cows.
Well, she's thrown down the gauntlet, everybody. There it is, Marti. Woo!
So if you want to practice staying in the room of difference, I'm sure you could come to my channel and listen.
Yeah, fight or flight. We do get that every once in a while, don't we? So this has been a wonderful discussion, and hopefully it's been helpful for everybody as we're headed to the holidays. And I think the point is love. We love our friends, we love our relatives, and they love us. And so there are ways to make it work, I think. So, all right. Well, everybody, you can find us on YouTube. We are Mormonish. We also have a Facebook presence where we discuss the different episodes. We're on Instagram. We're on all the major podcasts. So like and subscribe and find us and comment and let us know the strategies that you have found that work for you as you're navigating the holidays, or anytime when you're talking to families across difference divides. I love that phrase. That's going to be my new phrase, a difference divide. So, all right, everybody, happy holidays, and we will see you again. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.